Hello and welcome to another edition of Proficio Cyber Chats. I would like to welcome our guests, Brian Bora, Director of Security Engineering for Proficio, and Tim Brooks, Chief Technology Officer for CISOShare. On today's episode, Brian and Tim will be answering questions such as where to start when working to improve your security posture, how to be prepared for a security incident, and why partners have become so critical in today's environment. Let's chat. While the need for cybersecurity is critical, many organizations struggle with where to start. What are some tips for companies wanting to improve their cybersecurity posture?
So with regards to this topic, a lot of times it's the basics that we still see ignored, and they're tried and true. So you may have a lot of technology in your organization, and they're producing a lot of alerts. Are the alerts being consistently reviewed? Do you have someone to actually review those, and are you checking that they're being reviewed? And the actions need to be auditable. You need someone not just to glance at an email, but actually follow through with the ticket and close it out. That's where we see the clients or the organizations that are doing the best. They have auditing and they're making sure that they're reviewing the actual alerts coming from their technology stack. Another thing is there's a lot of new cloud technologies, and your traditional staff may have just knowledge of on-premise controls such as firewalls, antivirus technologies. But a lot of people are moving or migrating to AWS or Azure. They're migrating to the cloud. There's a lot of SaaS-based applications. So you assume that those individuals are experts in their technologies, and they're not. So as we see these transitions happen, we're seeing a lot of clients where they can make serious mistakes in these configurations and leave their organizations insecure in various ways. So don't just assume your staff can handle the cloud. They may need training, they may need help, may need assurances that these new technologies they're moving to that they understand them. And the last is 24/7 monitoring. A lot of times it's best practice to have 24/7 monitoring, but if you get an alert at 3 a.m., if you're not going to respond to it or take any action on it and see it at 8 a.m. anyways, then that monitoring isn't as valuable. If you have 24/7 monitoring, pairing it with some type of response is what's really effective and sound. Regarding that, what are your thoughts, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree with you on that. Probably taking those like one at a time, right? So the piece around alerting and monitoring, a lot of times what we see out there is folks have logging enabled, or if they have it enabled, it's not tuned in any way, shape, or form. So they get massive alert fatigue, right? So you end up missing a lot of like key critical alerts, right? Because you just get overwhelmed, and the nature of the beast is people start ignoring stuff, right? So I think not just having 24/7 monitoring and alerting, but having it done in a way where use cases are well defined and tuned such that you're really being alerted on what's actionable and necessary, and kind of tuning out all the other noise and fluff, if you will. So I think that's pretty key. I see a lot of misses on that, throughout, different organizations. So, that's something that is really necessary. Along with that, what you were talking about with the cloud, again, I see that quite a bit, right? People try to apply on-prem security strategies to AWS or GCP, things like that. And although you can do that, it's not necessarily efficient. It's not, and a lot of times it also causes gaps in security. So having folks who are well versed in cloud-specific security strategies is becoming more and more important, in this day and age. The other thing that I would really probably put out there is staffing. So just having bodies in some way, shape, or form in order to actually do this work, right? So what I come across quite a bit is that folks will be very tool orientated. So they'll buy a ton of cool next generation toys, and unfortunately, what ends up happening is either the stuff becomes shelfware, or it's set up in a very basic format where then you get back to alert fatigue and things like that, or just massive gaps in detections and ability to respond. So Nine times out of 10, when I go in and I do consulting, I see that a security group is pretty well understaffed in order to accomplish, like, what they're there to accomplish. So I think, either staffing or being pretty strategic on how to outsource certain key security functions that maybe aren't core to your business or it's a pretty important thing to include in order to have a secured and safe organization. Does that make sense?
It does. And one of the things I want to touch on too that's key with alert fatigue, a lot of times what we see in a lot of organizations for an MDR when we're reviewing alerts and we identify noise, sometimes people are concerned with tuning or filtering out noise because they're afraid someday that alert or that use case or that MDR detection might be something, but you've reviewed 50 and it hasn't been anything. You need that individual that's going to say, okay, we accept the risk. We're going to tune this out because it's not any good. It's not effective. It might be something someday, but let's look for something alternative. If you get caught up in certain alerts that have low tendencies to detect something solid, you're just going to get overwhelmed. And then, like Tim said, you end up getting alert fatigue and you're just glancing over a bunch of alerts and not engaging them. So when you're looking to tune out the noise, look for the individual that's the decision maker, and the most effective ones that kind of make decisions on tuning and say, get rid of this, it's ineffective. I'll take the blame if we miss something someday, but it's just not enough for us. And they wipe out the noise. That's the most effective organizations that are aggressive and kind of question what their use cases and monitoring are when what's coming from their technology stack, and wipe out the things, and they're aggressive to the point where they have actionable alerts. That's where we see organizations the most successful in how to address that.
Most security experts know that strong cybersecurity requires more than just purchasing tools. How can organizations stay better protected?
That's a huge question if you think about it, right? There's a lot of ways to go about that. I think the first and foremost thing is you got to know what you're protecting. So the new CISO that walks into the first day on the job, doesn't know the lay of the land. They don't know what they're protecting necessarily. They don't know where their data resides, what applications are maybe critical to the environment. Do they have what network zones are there, stuff like that. So I think it really starts with, even before you get to implementing tools and alerts and stuff like that, it starts off with some sort of assessment, right? You need to assess, what do I have? What am I protecting? And then where does it sit in my environment, or out in the cloud or wherever, or hopefully not on somebody's laptop. From there, then you need to assess, well, okay, what technical safeguards do I have at my disposal? What processes do I have, or do I have any, around managing them, responding to them, whatever. I think that's like the first key thing. We do this all the time for customers. We come in and do a best practice assessment along with a architecture review. And 9 times out of 10, it sounds very basic, but brings to light a lot of gaps in either the organization's knowledge about where data may have resided, or brings up well, wow, I don't realize we didn't have a process around this. It's obviously something we need to address. So I think that's key. I don't know, Brian. I mean, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of clients, when we get our relationships with them, a lot of times we ask them for their incident response plan and they don't have one, or they're not really sure how to route their security incidents or process those things, and that's concerning. But one of the big things I think that's been emphasized this year. So you look at some of the vulnerabilities that have happened within the last 6 to 12 months. There was zero logon, there was Citrix ADC controllers, a lot of VPN vulnerabilities being targeted by a lot of different threat actors. So the big thing that came to plan is know what's in your environment, as Tim kind of spoke about. A risk-based vulnerability management program. Are you actually reviewing and taking action in a fast pace against your vulnerability scanning results? Do you have a program in place? Is someone responsible? Over the years, we've seen clients that they have vulnerabilities and they're there for months, and they don't rapidly review those vulnerabilities or take action. But some of the vulnerabilities that came up this year, the consequences of ignoring zero logon or ignoring some of those public-facing VPNs, it was bad. It was terrible results for not being aware of those and taking action, and that's likely going to continue. So detecting and knowing what you have, and then making sure you have a vulnerability lifecycle management program in place is absolutely critical. And a lot of these organizations that don't really have someone own that and take action on those results and know what's in those vulnerabilities, there's some major types of issues and exploits that may result in their organization getting owned by a ransomware, or their Active Directory getting owned in a few seconds with zero logon. So that's the big one that came up or stood out to me this year with regards to knowing what you have and planning around detection is vulnerability management. What do you think, Tim?
Yeah. No, I mean, no, it's spot on. We get called in all the time to do forensics and incident response, right, for clients and stuff like that. So unfortunately, I see the worst of it when people don't have the stuff in place. There's so many basic things that, like, the various ransomware, like Ryuk and stuff like that, that's out right now, easily be prevented with a healthy vulnerability management program in place, right? You detect that, oh wow, I'm using like SMB 1.0 or something like that, or I've got I'm for some reason my firewall's allowing SMB out. Why is that the case? Like things like that, where it's like basic configuration stuff that could be detected with a good plan like that, let alone missing patches and stuff like that. It's super necessary. I can't think of a better way to understand from a technical perspective, like where your gaps are without having a quality like vulnerability management program in place. I mean, that's the point of it, right?
In the event that a breach occurs, minutes, even seconds matter. What can organizations do to be better prepared for a security incident?
Yeah, well, the first thing you got to do is you need to have processes that the staff knows how to do the response, right? So you can have all the tools in the world, but if nobody really knows how to stitch a playbook together and go end to end to respond to a specific incident, you're dead in the water, right? Or you can't just rely on your endpoint protection blocking something. It's not necessarily the best way to go about it. So the best way to have once you develop the processes is to validate that they actually make sense and work, and that people are educated on them, right? So that's where the concept of having a team come into a room and sometimes bringing in a third party to help run through what we call tabletop exercises, right? But you sort of take a couple of different scenarios, have your playbooks that you have developed or are using, and everybody runs through it in an exercise, right? And generally what that does is it either validates the process is great, or it identifies opportunities for improving the response, which ultimately will reduce the time to respond, which is what we want in a security incident, right? We want to be able to jump on that that Ryuk problem before it spreads and encrypts like every system under the sun in your environment, or before you lose your data or whatever. So that's kind of it in a nutshell, right? So tabletop exercises are definitely important, and a lot of times they're largely missed, right? People just can't make the time for it, or ultimately, they're so short-staffed that they just don't have the time to build processes and stuff, because they're just constantly plugging leaks in a dam, essentially.
Yeah, no, agree. And so in our space, what we see is a lot of clients want SOAR or MDR, and if you don't test those procedures with tabletop exercises, a lot of times you assume things will work and you realize you missed steps. So Tim, you've probably seen this before. The big ones for us, this is one of the big things is exception handling. So when you're gonna quarantine endpoints with an EDR platform, you need to not quarantine probably the CEO's laptop or a domain controller. When you're going to perform blocks on your network perimeter, you probably need to know who your authorized scanners are, or else you're going to have problems. If you're going to take any actions in the SaaS-based applications on user anomalies, you're going to have to know what the service accounts are and what their behavior is. So the organization around the clients and understanding what they have, whether it be their partners, their asset information, or how their SaaS involves, is absolutely critical. So if you get into that project through tabletop exercises, you need to understand how exception handling works and when to introduce that. Another thing is data, historical data. So people may have ideas of when they want to perform a response, but you don't know the false positives of the impact unless you have the history of the data. So if you say, you know what, every time an endpoint does X, we'd like to perform a quarantine. Well, hold on, do you have 90 days of data, and can you see if a legitimate application does that as part of normal behavior in the organization? Those are the information points. Don't guess at response. Have the historical data, study it, and then discover any exceptions and put on those exceptions. So if you implement these programs, be ready to do that and then test them and make sure they're incorporated through tabletop exercises. And one of the last things we've seen is kind of key. You can have the software, that capability, but the way the organizations communicate, emails, notifications of when things happen, the handoffs between different teams, without tabletop exercises, a lot of times you miss those. And then things happen and the different teams don't know because they don't have the inputs or know how to receive the outputs of those actions being taken. So the vendors, a lot of times, EDR vendors, a lot of these different products, they'll tell you it's easy to get you over the line to buy the product and purchase the solution, but that other half of it, be ready for those things that we kind of discussed or we see, because it is work, and it is high stakes for mistakes.
With many organizations facing resource constraints, some have turned to outsourcing some or all of their security operations. Why have partners become so critical, and how can you ensure success?
A lot of times partners can really help you out. SOAR-based platforms, they're probably going to require some coding and cybersecurity experience. Those are really hard individuals to find right now. Experts on SIM, even next-gen firewall is really difficult to find. And when you bring them on, a lot of times they may go somewhere else, and then you have to start over, and sometimes it's very difficult. So providers, they learn the technologies, and then when you bring them on, they get to share that or recycle that information and share with you. Here are the challenges. Here's how you do it. What do you think about this and this and that? This is why this won't work, or this is why it will work, and here's where we've been successful. And then you can take that knowledge and deploy it within your organization.
This is like kind of, I think, where a lot of people that were, in the management role need to kind of take a step back and think about, like, okay, well, what does my staff complement actually look like right now? Like, how many people do I have? What kind of skill sets do I have on board? And if I'm looking at a really awesome, SOAR tool or something, right? But no, I only have like 3 people on my staff, and nobody has a background whatsoever in development. That might not be necessarily the best thing to just run out and buy without engaging a partner to maybe take that off their hands for them. I don't know if that's a great example. SOAR is actually supposed to solve all your problems, but yeah. So, but the same thing goes, like, if you want to start implementing like RAD firewalls or something, but really your security staff is compliance driven people, and they don't necessarily have a good foundation in network security or network architecture. That's maybe you probably still do need those firewalls, obviously, but you're going to need to think about finding a partner likely to offload that to, because it's just not your core competency, right? So that's something where I see a lot of smaller shops try to like have their IT guy, right? Handle all this stuff, and the guy's doing his best, but it doesn't necessarily work out very well. So that's, I don't know. I think in certain key areas, you definitely need to look at partners instead of just buying a tool.
The one thing you should be aware of, though, that the providers don't know is your organization. So where you have to meet in the middle with your organization is you have to have that data and know your business and your goals and your strategy, and the provider can bring in the platform specific expertise usually to tell you how to use it, where it will and won't work, and how to achieve your goals. So the most successful types of relationships are usually a meeting in the middle where both sides are experts. The providers are experts in the platforms, the software. They can share their experiences from other organizations. And then the client has the organization and data and knows their goals and knows how to provide the asset information and modeling to achieve what they want. So, and then I know what's huge is what's interesting about a lot of these organizations we work with. Yeah, you have frameworks like NIST or you go after MITRE for detection, but everyone has their own way of doing things, and there's a lot of these procedures that aren't really people go about it the best effort, and a lot of times they don't know what they're doing. Someone like in Tim's company, they work on maturing cybersecurity procedures and processes, and they've been through these organizations and where people have been have faltered or do different things, and kind of Tim, you can kind of share a lot of these procedures and mature a lot of these elements of security operations that are really hard for organizations to take on their own.
We'd like to take this opportunity to thank Brian and Tim for joining us on today's episode. If you have any questions related to the topics discussed today, please feel free to reach out to us at proficio.com or proficio.es in Spanish. Thanks again for tuning in, and hope you join us on the next episode of Proficio Cyber Chats.